Who cares about Watchmen? Episode 4. If you don't like my story, write your own. This week, as usual, we have myself, Neo from Australia, and Ngiga from England. Both of us longtime fans of the Watchmen comic and the TV adaptation showrunner Damon Lindelof's, his recent TV work, at least. And also with us is Miriz from America, who has also read the comic and is also aware that Damon Lindelof exists. And joining this week as well is another American, Nate. Nate, what's your experience with Watchmen and with Lindelof?
Yes, I read the Watchmen comics a very long time ago, and so I'm, familiar, but I'm more familiar with the movie. Not sure how much that counts for. And I've seen The Leftovers. I love The Leftovers. So I was very excited when Lindelof was the pick.
Yeah, I think that's similar to me and Gig as well. Oh yeah, isn't your girlfriend a first timer to everything?
Yes. Yeah.
How's that going?
She has no familiarity with Watchmen. I just got her to watch the movie actually, but only after the first 3 episodes, which was probably a mistake. But yeah, no, she enjoys it a lot. Definitely bewildered, but a lot of the references to the comic and all that are very parenthetical, they don't really need, and they're doing a good job with the exposition so far. Yeah, I feel like there should be more exposition, because whenever there's a little tidbit about the past, it's like, oh, what was that? Really got to focus on that, because it's obvious that it's all informing every aspect of the show. It's hard to do exposition without it being clumsy, and I think they've done a great job so far.
To briefly go over the episode before we start cracking its shell and discussing the delicious eggy innards. This week saw the introduction of Lady True, the Vietnamese-American trillionaire who, in another one of the show's riffs on Superman's origin story, opened the episode by buying a farm and land belonging to 2 parents, the Clarks, who couldn't conceive, right before something from space landed on it. Back in Tulsa, Angela confirms the wheelchair-ridden man, Will Reeves, the boy from the Tulsa massacre sequence that opened the whole show, is her paternal grandfather. She encounters FBI agent and former superhero Laurie Blake from the end of episode 3, who was surprised to see Sister Knight's car drop from the sky. Sister Knight notices Will Reeves' pills, apparently to help him with his memory, are still inside the vehicle. Sister Knight drops off murdered Police Chief Judd Crawford's KKK outfit, as well as those memory pills, at fellow masked cop-looking Glass's bunker. She notices and chases an unlicensed, illegal vigilante, what are we calling him?
Slug Man. Raston Warrior Robot.
We'll stick with Lube Man for now, and he slides himself down a sewer grate. Laurie suspects Lady True's sci-fi hovercraft devices were used to dump Sister Knight's car, and True seems to cooperate with the investigation, but she pushes Sister Knight to think on those memory pills because True is in cahoots with Will Reeves, and both of them speak mysteriously about plans and plots and betrayals even though they're alone. All these things sure to be elaborated on in future episodes. But meanwhile, in Jeremy Irons' land, he fishes some babies out of a lake, he cooks them up into adult servants, he surveys a massacre of servants presumably wrought by himself the night previous, he catapults some corpses into the sky where they disappear beyond a certain height, and he bemoans his apparent imprisonment in the castle and landscape he inhabits, announcing plans to escape. What did we think of all these proceedings?
What an episode.
And Mirrors, you just watched it, you just finished it,
Yes.
So what's your immediate impression?
This is hilarious. I love this show. I know I keep going back and forth, but it's a lot of fun. Very goofy at times, but very entertaining. A lot of good, weird, fucked up imagery. Like I am, at this very moment, looking at the scene right after the Slug Man Pennywise is out, and the the smear left behind really does look like Dr. Manhattan. I don't know why, but it's great.
See, it reminds me of like a trail of squid might leave. It reminds me, it looks a bit squiddy to me.
Yeah.
A bit Lovecraftian, so to speak.
Who do you think Lube Man is? jumping straight to that question.
Possibly Petey or maybe Senator Keene.
What if it's Senator Keene? I would love that, but I doubt it.
I have a theory that, I don't know. Now that I've noticed the, Dr. Manhattan smear, I am wondering if maybe there's some significance to Petey looking an awful lot like a pre-accident, Osterman. I just figured she had a type, you know?
I mean, yeah, and also Laurie does seem to be very hot for Cal as well, and Cal is another character who's frequently speculated to be some form of Manhattan. But yeah, I'm on the Lube Man is Petey train personally. The figure matches too well.
If we're talking Cal, the clue is right in his name, isn't it?
Oh god, yeah. See, something that recently came up. You might recall that if you've been reading the extra files and stuff on the website, you might know that the dildo that Laurie was seen using in episode 3 is officially called an Excalibur, basically as in King Arthur's sword. And someone on Reddit has recently noticed that Angela's husband's name is Cal Abar. So, could it be a clue? Excalibur?
Oh my god.
Cal is basically a giant dildo of Dr. Manhattan. I mean, you know, it all fits together.
Was Cal acting like a bit of a dildo in his little fedora scene?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what to make of that. Usually when you see a show lean heavy into the heaven isn't real, it's meant to juxtapose with religious elements elsewhere, but there's not anything like that in the show so far.
Dr. Manhattan is going to be back, I figure, and I think that's what they're going for, is it's sort of a world-building thing, is illustrating how intensely atheist this America is.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with what's coming up next episode.
Cal seems to have some big aversion to lying that Angela kind of lampshaded at the end, so I guess he's just not the type to mince words.
Yeah, I thought maybe that was set up for the lying bit later on, but...
Some people have inferred that Cal's somewhat kind of matter-of-fact and emotionless kind of account of life and death could be a clue that he's actually Dr. Manhattan, because, you know, only Dr. Manhattan would be an atheist. And obviously I think that's fairly flimsy evidence, but it did strike me that the way he phrased it, as in speaking of life and death as a bit like a cycle and going over the whole process from before birth to after death, and the way he phrases it as it being returning to the same state as before, there is something vaguely Manhattanish about that, if only in the sense that it recognises like the pure like atomic sort of reality of, you know, atoms and so on and so forth. It's the sort of thing that you might say if you had that sort of all times happening at once perspective that Manhattan has. So I don't think Cal is Manhattan, but it's a nice nod to that sort of worldview, isn't it, I think?
Same. Mm-hmm. And I think what I was trying to get across is I think that the whole... that maybe we didn't get that much of that in the original comic, but what they're saying in this series is that sort of everybody sees life that way now. Especially millennials who would have been born post-Manhattan, unlike... you know, the boomers in the first book.
I think the show kind of eggs on these harebrained readings. Like, I wasn't even gunning for the egg. Fine, but I think just the kind of mystery boxy reticence to elaborate or expand on certain things. Like with Jeremy Irons' identity in the first 2 episodes, it kind of demands these crazy readings that, you know, might not be logical or even really keyed into ideas the show is doing sometimes. But when you're making so many things mysteries, it's like the whole Lindelof thing. You start going, oh, what if this is this? What if that is that? It's kind of begging for it. But this episode had so much about eggs and legacy and life and death and all that that kind of thing with Cal's speech felt fairly unified to me.
On the note about God and stuff, Nate, you mentioned that it doesn't feel like there's been many religious elements in the show so far, and it strikes me that obviously the whole thing with Dr. Manhattan is that he's kind of a god figure, and between him and the Squid, as we've said, this idea of sort of belief has sort of been shattered slightly. But it does strike me that Manhattan seems to still be serving the role of a quasi-god figure to some people, because we saw in episode 3 that you have these, confessional booths where you can kind of, you can tell yourself you're talking to Dr. Manhattan and such. So it seems to me like there's possibly not necessarily religious, but spiritual or cosmic element to the show that hasn't quite come to the fore yet, but it might do later on, because that seems to be hanging over everything. This idea of what's going on with Dr. Manhattan.
Well,
I see.
The answer to life's mysteries is life's histories.
Yeah. A lot of stuff about generations and legacy in this episode.
Yeah, and I think that the little scene of exposition where they explained the whole backstory with the comedian and all that, I thought that was really interesting, because for how fundamental Dr. Manhattan is to this whole universe and the worldview of everyone in it, I was really surprised to hear that Angela didn't seem to know immediately who Silk Spectre was.
I liked that. I thought that was an interesting world-building thing. Like, you see Rorschach and Dr. Manhattan have persisted because Rorschach became a huge cult conspiracy figure and Dr. Manhattan's like God. But the Crime Busters were never an actual group in the 80s. They had that one meeting, but it was only Rorschach and Night Owl that worked together. They were never actually a group. The Minutemen did some group things, but this was in the 1940s, and I feel like apart from the current TV show, I think a lot of it would absolutely just filter away. And it's interesting to see these things that are so central to the comic. Just why would this matter in Oklahoma? In 2019. I quite like that.
Yeah.
What surprised me with that scene in the car is that Laurie asked Peter to explain sort of what her trauma is that kind of made her become a masked vigilante, and they go to the comedian sexually assaulting her mother, and what I thought they were going to bring up was the fact that Laurie's mother, Sally, pretty much imposed the vigilante life on her daughter as a way of creating her own legacy, or molding her own basically molding her child in her own image. And because that seemed like it would have been much more in line with other stuff we see around the episode, like whatever Lady True's doing to her daughter, whatever Will's doing to Angela. There's definitely this the whole episode seems to ruminate around this theme of legacy and sort of generational reproductive legacy. Let's phrase it like that.
It's even when they talk about thermodynamic miracles, Petey doesn't mention that he kind of buries the lead that it's that the Silk Spectre the first slept consensually with the comedian later, which is where Laurie comes from.
And even the Adrian Veidt scene was vaguely in line with the episode theme this week, which I think it hasn't been in the past, because this time you had Veidt fishing babies out of the lake. So obviously there's a baby in the scene, so that connects it to the first scene, I suppose. But beyond that, it's and also the scene in general, it shows Mr. Phillips and Miss Crookshanks sort of as children, sort of at the start of their life cycle, so to speak. But yeah, other than that, it was fairly disconnected from the rest of the ep, as usual. But I love those little Death Stranding babies. So fucked up.
Do you think there is a more tangible connection between the babies in the lake and the fact that Lady True can evidently grow babies?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
See, I don't know. I'm still open to the possibility that maybe this is all some horrible experiment from Dr. Manhattan or something. I don't know, but that's
also possible.
I mean, it seems to me, with Lady True growing babies, right, that seems very calculated, very scientific, a very kind of delineated and clear process, whereas having them just sort of grow almost like plants in a lake, and Veidt has to fish them out, that seems, there's a weird sort of organicness to that, which it makes it seems kind of messy, and Veidt does point out himself that there are flaws in the design, like it was sort of a bit like a sort of not quite perfect sort of kind of, it's someone's approximation of life rather than an actual like clinical attempt to create life. There's a weird naturality and also a strangeness to it, which doesn't sound like Lady True to me, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, one of the very few things I could see justifying Dr. Manhattan being back in the solar system is that if at the end of the comic where he sends these off to create life, if he was having troubles with that, I think Adrian Veidt is like one of the only humans he'd probably be interested in the opinions of, because Adrian is so smart and he's very good at genetic manipulation and stuff. So I can kind of see some justification for Manhattan being around, but apparently he's been on Mars for 30 years, so who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, and I was looking at the timing with everything, because they mentioned in an earlier episode, I believe, that Ozymandias had been missing since 2011.
Yeah.
And so if, as this episode established, the pattern continues that that 1 year passes in every episode for Veidt on Mars or wherever he is, then he'll catch up with the present in episode 8.
Yeah, which
Yeah,
makes
that's-
sense, like, dramatically.
Yeah, yeah.
Having said that, the present, the nature of kind of where exactly he will synchronize with the present timeline, that's up for grabs, I think. I saw speculation that the item that crashed down at the start of this episode might be a capsule that has Veidt in it or something. Like, it could be that the stuff that happens for Veidt that we have not seen yet on Mars might have already happened in terms of the Tulsa timeline. Like, it's not quite synced up in that way, if you see what I mean.
For sure.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and that's interesting. What do you think it was that crashed? I mean, obviously we have no clue, but...
Oh, it's a birthing matrix from Krypton.
Ah, classic.
It's Dr.
Makes
Manhattan's
sense.
son.
If it's not related to Veidt, I don't see, like, how we could even guess. Like, what would it even be if it's not something he's catapulting?
Actually, that reminds me. Did anybody, when watching that part, get the sense that it was taking place in the past? And that when I saw it, I thought that maybe the going by the transition that they had, that the space where it touched down was the spot where Lady True put one of those Manhattan things.
Oh, yeah, because of the
Manhattan booths.
transition shot afterwards.
The transition was very,
Yeah.
I don't know, it could have been a time thing, it could have been...
And it feels like a character origin scene, which can, don't have to be strictly in the present continuity. It's just setting up what Lady True's like, who she is. So yeah, I could see that.
I think it's worth remembering that her daughter Bian was in that scene, and she didn't look very different, so it can't have been like very
catch.
many years.
I have a theory about that.
Yeah.
I have a theory about that.
That's a good point. Yeah, and did you notice that the daughter actually... She was in episode 2, briefly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the two Bernards.
Yes, I named her Bernadette, but that's not her name. Her name does start with B, so it's close. But she's still one of the. But she's an honorary Bernard.
Yes, yes.
Do we think she's daughter, a clone daughter? What do we think the deal with her is?
Not only a clone daughter, I think there's some sort of preservation thing going on with her sleeping with a thing in.
Yeah, I see two options. Either she's a clone and she's getting some kind of, flashbacks to her mother's life or her grandmother's life, or she's more normal, but it's the stuff that was in the IV that was giving her the strange dreams.
Could be. We do know that in this universe, not only do psychic powers exist, but so does genetic memory.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be that, the Phillips and Crookshanks are able to walk, talk, and understand when they're only a few hours old, so that would imply that they're remembering those skills. I don't know. That's my theory.
You'll note Lady True refers to Will Reeves's memory pills as like a scheme, passive-aggressive exposition.
I thought that was a beautiful phrase, passive, because that's kind of a self-aware thing to describe.
It's very Lindelof self-awareness, but I think the idea is he doesn't need them. He wants Angela to be curious and take one, because presumably he's embedded his memories or something into them, since that's something that can happen in this world.
I could see that.
Yeah, that seems like a good bet.
See, with the daughter, my thinking is less an actual clone of Lady True, but possibly a daughter created through genetic... You know what I mean? IVF, something like that.
Yeah.
So, like, a daughter
Custom
created...
made.
Yeah, perhaps even...
A Boba
without...
Fett.
Yeah, it could be a daughter created without a father, because Lady True seems to be a sort of a misandrist. She was like ladies only when she invited the Laurie and Angela to her room. But yeah, and I am thinking I'm on the train of she's giving her own memories, her own trauma to her daughter, perhaps through this drug, this process. And I like that. I like the little detail that Lady True doesn't even walk Beyond back to bed. And when Beyond tells her, like, her feet still hurt and stuff, she's like, good. She wants it to hurt. Like, she wants this pain and kind of this kind of damaging learning experience to kind of filter through. And it strikes me that the theme isn't just generational legacy, so to speak, but parents passing down their own trauma and their own problems to future generations, because that links everything together. The idea of how a trauma can pass through and kind of keep lingering long after it's been, committed.
Like you said the other week about the quantum view of justice.
Yeah.
Generational view of time. I think that I think you're right. And plus that would make more sense of Petey alighting the actual personal reason why, the genuine personal trauma for Ms. Blake. Sorry.
Speaking of justice, I think this idea Gig touched on about a child without a father, or a child that can genetically be made, needing only one participant of a couple. I hope this comes to the fore, because with Will Reeves presumably being Hooded Justice and being, paternally related to Angela.
Oh, super obviously, yeah.
Hooded Justice is gay in the comic, and the show doesn't really seem to have any gay characters around, so I really hope they're not,
just
changing his sexuality or something.
So
I hope it's a genetic thing that, maybe Hooded Justice having children was... Well, I guess this Lady True is probably too young, but I hope that it's some kind of genetic thing and not that he just, married a woman and had kids straightly.
A marriage of convenience, perhaps.
That was not uncommon. And I mean, it would not be by far the least problematic... it would by far not be the least problematic...
Try again.
I know what you mean, I agree.
It would by far not be the most problematic family tree in this story so far.
For sure. Yeah. It just sticks out to me weirdly because the comic is so full of sexuality and gay characters and all this kind of thing that it feels weird for the show to not be having that. So I don't know. I've got my eyes out basically.
Yeah, we even found out this week that Wade, a Looking Glass's ex, is a she as well. So that verged me because I was holding out hope for Wade to be the gay one in the cast. That doesn't seem to have happened. So
now I know
we'll find out more at some
point.
Type. Yeah.
Oh man, I think hopefully we're gonna find out anything else we're gonna find out about Looking Glass next week, because I just have a feeling,
Yeah. You know, it just strikes me with two Americans here. I've got to ask, what did you think of Veight's pronunciation of "I am your master"? It was a really pronounced American attempt to say like "master," and it contrasted with his regular accent. Interestingly,
I've never really had a problem with Irons as Veidt, simply because Veidt having a weird accent is something that I guess everybody's decided is canon.
Yeah.
Like, that was a major part of Good's performance.
Yeah, there are some details about this show's version of Veidt, though. Neo, I know you were very unhappy with something Veidt is shown to have done in this episode, as you elabbed to me last night, so go on.
What it is it's the pattern. I like the odd-numbered episodes treatment of Veidt, because I really liked the Veidt scenes in episode 1 and 3, and I really got annoyed by the ones in episode 2 and 4. What it was I liked most of the stuff, the babies and all that. Like, this was all implied, so there's a little, when you unveil the mystery, there's always a little lessening, I think. But it was cool and it was abstract, the babies and all that stuff. I liked all that. But when we go to the scene where there's like 30 clones that he's, stabbed all of them, and he goes, oh, I had a rough night, or something like that. It's just, I feel like all the things interesting about this character in the comic don't connect at all to him just being like a loony psychopath stabbing people, and I get that.
Excuse me.
Wait,
hold on. Are we talking about Adrian don't kid yourself, squid yourself fight?
Look,
are we talking about every night I dream I'm swimming towards something massive fight? Yeah. Look, we're talking about the guy who killed off all of his scientists and all of his artists with dynamite.
He didn't
fight
out a window.
He didn't viscerally stab anyone. He didn't take joy. Well, apart from maybe his crime-fighting activities, but
he was super stoked when he caught a bullet with his bare hands.
Yeah,
So-
that's protecting himself. He never seemed the type to like go Jack the Ripper, and
Or
like
He-
Coke
Are
or
you?
But
I
he's been
feel like we're not
cast,
going to agree on this
I
topic.
feel like it's a very uninteresting version of Veidt to do, and I feel like I get how you can get the character there, like, oh, he's been in prison for a while, it's been decades since he did that big event that's going to screw up his mind, but I'm just not that interested in a Veidt that just goes around, like, randomly stabbing people and, you know, being fine with it. I don't think that's interesting. Like, he's more dispassionate. I would never have burdened pathetic creatures with the gift of life. You need purpose to be alive. That's interesting. Him valuing their lives, not at all, is interesting. Him just like stabbing them like he's a serial killer, I don't find that interesting. I find just that kind of a lame way to make the Veidt scenes weird and creepy. It wasn't working for me.
That's fair. I also noticed that he seems to have the game warden's corpse there too.
Yeah,
So that
I did
confirms
notice
that the game warden
Oh, really?
is...
I'm not sure about that. I think it might just be like the horse, not the game warden, but you might recall in an earlier
yeah,
episode,
that's
it
right.
might be Montrose, the guy who
Yeah.
looks after the horses. It might be that guy, because I know he had the hat on, but I'm not sure. I don't think it's the game warden, in my opinion. I think
There's
that
two
would
of them
be
there, which is what made me think it.
well, maybe, but I don't think they kill the game warden off screen. I think they flagged that up
He's
as
too
really
critical.
important last time, and I think that's going
Yeah.
to be important again.
Yeah, I think we'll see him next week. The game
Yeah,
warden.
quite possibly. Regarding the massacre, it strikes me that, yeah, I do basically agree it's not a very Veidt thing to do, but nonetheless, I sort of took it in stride, because Veidt isn't the sort of character where, you know, it's certainly this version of him, where if he does one thing, I take that as the direction of his character. Like, I'm not like, oh, he's the Jack the Ripper psychopath now, he's going to go around stabbing everyone. Rather, it's more like I wouldn't put anything past him. Like, this is a guy who earlier on in his life decided he's going to become Alexander the Great and dedicated his life to doing this whole project, and does so many strange and kind of bizarre things. It's almost like if you put him in a corner like he is now, it's kind of, he could do anything, and I wouldn't necessarily suggest that's his direction now. It could just be, you know, I think it's entirely possible he might just lash out at one point. And I think his apathy towards that act, I think, is informed by the fact that he simply just does not really value these clones' lives at all. And I don't think he really sees much of a like emotional value to it one way or the other. I don't think he takes particular pleasure in killing them. I don't think he's particularly horrified by the act either. I think sometimes maybe he just really needed to take his stress out and just wanted to try it. I think, I don't think it was amazing, but it didn't really bug me either.
What you need to understand, Gig and Neo, is that he made himself feel all of their deaths months ago. This has been a long time coming.
Oh, just on that note of the months ago thing, did you like when Lady True did the trademark Ozymandias move in the first scene where she's like, I made your baby 35 minutes ago. I'm not some public
that was-
serial
Yeah,
villain.
she's-
That was so
great.
good.
Did you notice the reference to Lost with Will Reeves not needing the wheelchair?
Didn't that also happen in Leftovers?
I forgot about that.
Every
Wow.
Lindelof show has this key scene of someone getting up out of a wheelchair.
That is almost Moffat level repeating yourself, isn't it? Like, it's crazy.
That Will and True scene wasn't working for me great either. Just like Bjarne goes to bed, and so Will and True are alone, and yet they're still talking in super vague terms about their plan and stuff. It feels very written for TV. Like, why don't you just say what your plan is? Why aren't you talking directly
On
to
the
each
other
other?
hand, earlier they had Veidt speaking in "I'm now going to describe my plan in great detail."
True.
Because
Yeah, that was
so
too much.
it was.
The thing is,
Out.
the whole explaining your plan monologue, I'd say it's a bit more believable for Veidt because, obviously he's somewhat notorious for giving one of the quintessential monologues in the original comic. So I can buy that he might narrate his actions to his any captive audience that's present. But yeah, the Will and Lady True stuff, it was a bit too sort of, we're gonna say some mysterious spooky stuff.
Will seems like a matter-of-fact, like down-to-earth character, so I don't see why he would feel the
agree.
need to be so mysterious portents. Let's talk around things.
Yeah, I understand that they needed to have some kind of conversation in order to have a good ending to the episode, and just the reveal that he was there is completely undercut by, the previous quote in Vietnamese, which I thought was a really nice touch to
That's great.
cap off that scene.
That was great.
Yeah, but not a fan. I look forward to just getting the answers.
So I'm watching the Lube Man scene on a constant loop over and over
So
again.
good.
I have been
Of course.
ever since I stopped watching the episode. And two things. One, I noticed a cute little world-building detail that the car place they run through has easy financing for electro refitting,
Yeah.
which is great historical detail from the comic. Also, the other thing I noticed is he is impressively well endowed. Because that suit does not hide a single thing. So,
That's
you know
more
what?
shades
Maybe
of the leftovers.
it's Petey. I think it is Petey.
Oh, maybe it's Dr. Manhattan. If we consider
I think-
that possibility.
I think what I should clarify is, I think that Petey is Osterman, ergo it is Manhattan.
I see. Got it.
Really, I think everyone is Manhattan. And they're all in purgatory.
Well, the everyone is Manhattan idea. That's. I'm not a fan, but it's getting some traction. I know Gig is more of a fan of that than me.
It's sort of less that everyone is Manhattan, but more that perhaps everything is Manhattan. I think it could be that in his attempt to create life, rather than just some shitty little biodome on Mars, maybe Manhattan decided to simulate an entire universe. So, and that's where this Earth is taking place. So everyone is
So
technically Manhattan.
he's the basilisk.
Yeah, if you like. It's just,
Oh my
would
god,
explain-
that actually
would
ties in
explain-
really well with something I was going to predict about where this is all going. But go ahead, Pete.
Oh, I just think that would tie in with the squid. Obviously, he has created a universe where the squid attack did actually happen, and that's why there's the recurring rainfalls. And
Oh.
yeah,
Oh wait, so you're thinking that this is all him simulating what would happen so as to convince Veidt not to do it?
oh well, that would just be too. Yeah, totally. Yeah,
That
let's
would
go
be-
with that.
that's maybe one iteration too many for me.
I
Well,
mean,
but
if
I think it would be
if
very
Lindelof
interesting.
really wants to go whole 10 yards, that's where you gotta go. And he
Yeah.
did say, if you don't like my story, write your own, so.
Yeah.
It does make me wonder if time travel will come into it. I've seen some speculation
I'm
that
positive.
I've seen some speculation that Lady True's big, long, firm,
Yeah.
rather impressive clock could actually be some sort of time machine device. I mean, they say it tells time. That could be a
Because
metaphor.
otherwise, what is it?
I don't know. It could be a giant red herring. Maybe it's just a clock. Like, I don't know.
I worry. I know the comic has psychics and stuff, much to my distaste. But I worried you couldn't go too sci-fi with Watchmen. I think time travel's pushing it a bit.
Yeah,
I do think the show
agree
might be
with you
doing it.
there.
I just mean I might not like that the show is doing it.
Okay. I feel like...
The thing with
From both directions, I think. One, this is maybe a little too tinfoily to say out loud on the podcast. but who cares?
Come on.
I'm not too sure that there aren't psychics in reality anyway, so
Lord.
I don't see psychics as super sci-fi. But more importantly, time travel, that's sort of implicit with Manhattan. I think that this may be some sort of intrinsic field.
Is it?
It's
Yeah,
I wouldn't.
application.
It's not time travel. It's time experience.
Awareness. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
Manhattan has.
Yeah, there's a crucial distinction there, I think, between time travel as we see it in Doctor Who or some average sci-fi story, where a person can kind of hop in a capsule and go back to the past or whatever, and time travel as phrased in the Watchmaker chapter of the comic, whereby Manhattan's perception can kind of look over the whole timeline pretty much at any point, because he exists almost outside of time. That's not quite the same thing as travel, but it does suggest like a
I get what you're
desequencing
saying.
of experience. I think if Lindelof is savvy, he'll be looking at that latter idea of time rather than the former sort of Doctor Who idea of time.
And if he isn't, he might do it before Watchmen did and have Manhattan just actually time travel.
Oh, okay.
I haven't read it.
Yeah, I think that I don't know if anyone has seen or is watching Mr. Robot. But
Nobody.
Lady True's clock would be the exact same as a plot line there that people have long speculated is related to time travel. So, frankly,
Mr. Robot?
That show also has a very mysterious Asian billionaire figure, doesn't it? Who's got this mysterious device.
Exactly. With a mysterious project in the Congo or America or wherever that people think is time travel, but I hope that neither show goes in that direction. So I look forward to being disappointed in probably both cases.
Yeah, speaking of time travel, just a weird little stylistic touch in this episode. Did you notice it had like a straight flashback to the previous episodes, like Rorschach, masked person at the funeral thing? Like it was like 1 second direct footage. Like not in the previously on, like in the middle of the episode. I thought that was weird.
I think it's supposed to be like a PTSD thing because
like a flashback.
It's not a flashback in the storytelling sense, but in the survivor sense.
I thought it was fine because certainly because
I liked it was brutal.
Yeah, that's the point, because certainly with that whole conversation with Angela and Topher, something they've reminded us with Topher actually is that he has a similar kind of trauma to Angela, and that they're sort of bonding over this constant brutality that they're always suffering. So yeah, I think just showing a brief clip of the headshot there, I think I didn't really register it, but I thought it was fine. It didn't break the show too much.
Well, in general, I really liked the direction for this episode way more than episode 3's direction. This wasn't the main director, Nicole Cassell again, but whoever this director was really hooked into her style. We got like an absolute surfeit of split diopter shots, so many. Those are clearly like the show's thing at this point, as well as the really hard on, it's not good phrasing, as well as the really noticeable match cuts, like with the waffle maker to outside, with the car boot. So the show really having its own visual identity was
What do we think about the
fair
moon
play
shot?
here. I think it's
Was it
like,
too much? Or
obviously,
was
it's so like ostentatious that it seems to actually legit suggest he's on the moon, but I don't think that's what they want to suggest. So I think it might have been a little much.
I don't know if it was supposed to be a red herring or if it's supposed to be a foreshadowing. It was just a really odd shot. I liked it, but
I think
it
it's
seems
a red
to be
herring.
implying something. If it's a red herring, I think it's a little over.
Yeah.
There were a few transitions that were a little hard to read like that, like the moon, and then we already talked about how the farm turned into the parking lot with the Manhattan booth. So yeah, I think it's
the pill bottle turning into the bed. That was
I liked that.
That was great. I don't know what it's implying, but it was great.
With stuff like the moon, it reminds me of how in the comic a lot of the time stuff would be visually paralleled, even if there was not necessarily a real solid connection to stuff. I think something that's nice with the comic is that parallels are allowed to sit without screaming at you that they have to kind of mean something all the time. And some of them obviously do mean a lot, but some of them don't. So it's more like it's a general style that suggests that everything is connected, even if those connections are not explicit or literal. So I kind of don't mind when they just do really brazen on the nose stuff, like the pill bottle into the bed or the telescope into the moon or whatever. Like it's a nice way of having each scene just sort of connect to the next one and having the whole thing feel very complete and unified.
Speaking of brazen, I don't know how brazen this reads to some people, but we got another song right from the comic this week with You're My Thrill, which in the comic plays when Dan and Laurie rescue people from a burning building. Like Dan literally plays it on the owl ship to all the people to enjoy.
Yeah, there were a few callbacks to the comic this episode. I saw some people talking online. I didn't pick up on this myself, of course, but some people were talking about the book that the lady from the farm was reading at the very start. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to look that up because it sounded familiar and it turned out that I knew it from somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's not as comic reference heavy as last episode, but there were still some tidbits.
The comic references were all in this week's PDpedia, the extended material on HBO's website, which was full of stuff for this week. So good? it was from 1995 when Dan and Laurie, in this time between the comic and the show that the show is filling in, Dan and Laurie got arrested foiling the. I hear this was an actual American terrorist attack that's famous. The Oklahoma.
Oh shit! They got McVeigh.
Yeah, it was
Awesome.
McVeigh.
Oh,
they got him.
wow.
They stopped the attack.
Okay.
And that was the incident that got them captured. Actually,
That's the one that I talked about on years the other time.
Oh, nice.
So Dan and Laurie foiled him before that all happened, but the police caught Dan and Laurie. Dan refused to talk. He only said, "Never compromise, never surrender," and then he did not say a word. Whereas Laurie, like very sardonically, but she talked, and she talked enough that, you know, she's an FBI agent now, she got out fine, whereas Dan's still in prison, serving a 30-year sentence. But anyway, at this time, Dan and Laurie had broken up, and as a, you know, last fuck you to Laurie when they were breaking up, because, you know, Dan was always a bit insecure about Dr. Manhattan being her ex, Dan made the dildo to give to Laurie as like an FU. And so we also get the blueprints for the dildo in the PDpedia material this week with Dan's handwriting.
You see all the insides of it. You see all the little different components it has, like the electro whatever resonator. It's mad. That was the first one I opened by accident. I just saw this huge dick looking at me. I was like, what the fuck is going on?
Sure, by accident.
It's
I didn't get you for that. Yeah, you think you make these comments about me on the podcast.
So, it sounded like Dan and Laurie had been superheroing around together for a while after the events of the original comic. Dan also founded an organization, Merlin Corps, with which he started making owl ships to supply to the police and other stuff to supply to the police. I'm not quite sure how all this worked, because that's like really obviously Dan Dreiberg, who I assume would have been wanted. But maybe the police didn't put it together that this new superhero... I don't know if he assumed a new name, like Laurie did, calling herself the Comedienne instead of Silk Spectre. But so Dan and Laurie happily superheroed and were like together for a while. Then it sounds like they were getting on and off again, while still sometimes doing superheroics together, but not being, you know, so much lovers anymore. And Laurie in this like in this court, not court, in this like
it's
police.
it's interrogation.
Yeah, interrogation transcript. She says Dan wanted kids, whereas Laurie just wanted to keep on superheroing. You know, eventually that ended in the dildo, and they were doing one last job together. Laurie actually describes it like a kind of Wild Westy romantic one last job, was foiling the Oklahoma bombing. And yeah, so that was, you know, maybe the most like direct law drop I think we've had yet on the PDPDs. I thought that was really interesting. I would have liked to seen that realized even.
Yeah. Well, I know that part of it is that they don't want to recast Patrick Wilson, which I think is misguided. I think I'll just bring it back. But yeah, I think
in the show's timeline, because Dan got 30 years in 1995. So like if season 2, it wouldn't even have to be set a decade later to get Dan out of prison, assuming he doesn't get out earlier. Like it's like 6 years later in the show's timeline, Dan is meant to be out of prison anyway. So if they do a season 2, and you know the show's established its own identity at this point, I think, and Dan's, you know, decades older, I think it would be okay to cast a Dan that isn't Patrick Wilson, much as I loved his Dan at this point. But
on the other hand, Patrick Wilson can just kind of look any age, so...
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But I assume season 2, if it even gets made, remember Lindelof said he'd only do this if he had a great idea or someone else had a great idea, and that doesn't seem to have happened yet. I feel like we'll probably lean away more from the comic, but, you know, who knows.
Yeah.
Speaking of Dan Dreiberg, I've noticed that, what's her name, the daughter of Lady True, is wearing... I've just been staring at her glasses, and they've been reminding me more and more of Dreiberg's glasses and his owl ship.
Oh yeah, it's funny seeing the shadows of these characters. You know, Rorschach, obviously the 7th Cavalry, Dan in the cops and in Bean's glasses, Ozymandias in the Squids, Manhattan in everything. Were there other crime busters?
Mothman in the Mothmen paparazzi.
Oh yeah.
Then there's
Metropolis
Captain Metropolis, who's never appeared anywhere, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah. The movie even cut him out of the crime buster meeting, even though that was his whole idea.
I'd totally forgotten too.
Why would they do that?
Because he's not in the story.
Oh my god. Yeah, it struck me that the whole legacy theme that you were talking about earlier, that even connects to the 7th Cavalry and stuff, because it came up in an earlier week that the KKK robe may very well have belonged to Judd's grandfather, and Judd's grandfather got that letter from Senator Joe Keane Sr. transferring the transferring the responsibility of KKK whatever supreme leader, whatever it is, to him. So it's a bit like in the same sense that we see characters from Vietnam and Tulsa passing their trauma down to the generations. We've got these KKK members passing their evil almost onto the next generation. It's kind of how these kind of dark kind of cults and stuff kind of sustain themselves through their reproduction.
It's a very Alan Moore thing. Like, this is very From Hell and Jerusalem to be doing this kind of interconnectivity of generations and things not being like discrete, like it might be easier to imagine.
Yeah, do we think we'll see a connection between the Tulsa riots that we saw in the first episode, and like will we see it from the perspective of the ancestor of Judd? There's an idea.
I'm not sure. I'm not even sure we'll see it again.
Feel free to use it, Lindelof. Yeah.
It might be a bit weird to show it from the perspective of the people committing the massacre.
A pro-KKK film.
On the other, it was also pretty weird the way that they have KKK members at the cultural center. I thought that was maybe a bit tone deaf on the part of the in-universe people.
What did you think of Looking Glass, in response to Angela asking if he thought the chief was a racist, how he just goes, he was a white man in Oklahoma?
Including himself in that, I noticed.
Yeah.
Where was his bunker? Like, I felt like visually it was trying to tell me.
It's in
his backyard?
Yeah, that's where, because this is Oklahoma, Tornado Alley. Pretty much everyone there has tornado bunkers.
I think Neo's point is that the editing made it seem almost like the bunker could be in Angela's backyard, because she went out of her house and then she was immediately there. I
feel like this is really like the economics theme of, the descendants of the Tulsa Massacre having the tax exemptions and, these white people in Nixonville. I was wondering, Christ, is like Looking Glass literally in a bunker in Sister Nine's backyard? Like, that's pretty intense.
It would be kind of cute if they lived together, to be honest, but I don't think that's what's going on.
I think, actually, you touched on something there. She lives in a nice house in the suburbs. His place looks fairly big, but it's also, like, it seems to be way out in the boonies. So there might be something there. He's just...
That tax exemption has got to add up over the years, for sure. So that was clarified as well. The reparations, it isn't like a lump sum handout or anything. It's a lifetime
it's not a Yang
tax
Gang
exemption.
kind of $1,000.
No, you're not getting money. You're not having to pay certain money is more what it is.
Random thing, what do you guys think of Angela accidentally, well, I'll say accidentally, she was going to do it deliberately, but she burned that propaganda flyer that Will kind of gave to her. Yeah, I was sad about that. I wonder if it's symbolic of her maybe going to detach herself from Will's legacy in some way in the future.
I thought it strikes Lindelof in the comic.
Yeah. I mean, it strikes me in another way that Angela is kind of detached from some of the other characters and the other messages here, is that Lady True insists that legacy is in blood and not in land. Angela's children aren't hers; she's adopted them from someone else, so she doesn't have a blood link to her children either. So it strikes me that maybe her arc is going to be repudiating some of these narratives about legacy and reproduction.
In the comic, the two Silk Spectres were related by blood. The two Night Owls weren't. I've got nothing beyond that.
Well,
it's good.
The way I see the thing with burning the letters, and again, because it's at times surprising how much this directly parallels the comic, is that this is about the point in that story where Dan gets rid of the comedian's button. So I'm guessing it's one of those things where the time of that MacGuffin has passed. Now we're on to the bigger mystery.
I do miss in the comic how everything's centralized through Rorschach's investigation. That lent a lot of coherency to how far-spanning all the flashbacks and the playing around with time and all the narratives going on in the original comic are. It's easy, like I think it's awkward to describe Rorschach as the protagonist because it's not really that kind of story, the comic, but it's easy to wrap your head around all the many things going on in the comic as it relates to his investigation. I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing, but the show really, I think, lacks that. Even with the Chief's death and everything, like there still has no connection to certain subplots that are going on.
Yeah, and there are so many things even in this episode that, like, why were they investigating the car? Was it ever explained why? I mean, it's obvious that Silk Spectre has some kind of better idea about the grandfather and that whole side of the story than she's letting on, to me at least. But why were they interested in the car?
Laurie did give kind of an explanation for why they're investigating the car. It disappeared the same night of Judd's death, and it was returned the night of his funeral.
Oh.
So it's a bit too much of a thermodynamic miracle, so to speak, for it all to be a total coincidence. But I do.
Plus, I think she knows.
Yeah, and I think it's believable that any really bizarrely suspicious event surrounding the death would be folded into the FBI investigation. Like, they want to know what's going on. You've also got a racist cult in the town. Like, anything could be a clue. So I think it's fair enough that they're investigating the car. But nonetheless, I do think
Plus, it literally dropped out of the air in front of an FBI officer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that too. Where Rorschach's investigation was sort of the spine, he was kind of an anchor for the story in the comic. With the show, it's a bit. Because they've got an actual full-on police department investigating the case in this case, and because obviously they're professionals, they know what they're doing, there's a bit less of an adventure to solving the crime, so to speak. It's more in the background. It's a bit like there's a police procedural going on somewhere, but we're more interested in what's going on at the outskirts of that. And I think key to that is the fact that Angela seems to fundamentally mistrust the police force that she is a part of, because she refuses to let any of the stuff that she's privy to on to the police. Like, she's throwing away all the evidence, she's cleaning everything, she's kept Will a total secret to the best of her ability, and it seems like she does not want any of this to get out to the police force. And I've been wondering, why is that? Because she's supposed to be on their side, but it seems like she really does not want that to get out. Like, she wants to keep it all to herself. And I wonder does that fundamental mistrust of the police force stem out of kind of her perspective on what they're doing and just how they operate?
I was just seeing it as, initially she didn't want to bring in Will Reeves because, you know, that was a really odd thing that happened, and she was investigating that on her own. But then she felt like culpability as things began to spiral out, and so she's just covering her tracks. But that's an interesting idea, that it's more rooted in a mistrust of the actual force. Yeah.
Which would be in keeping with what's been going on with her sort of history so far as we've seen it. Like her being one of the few survivors of the White Knight, for example.
Now I think about it, she found out that Judd, the police chief, had a KKK robe, so why would she? Anyone else could be in on it at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of the police, I'm kind of sad we haven't had more stuff of Red Scare and Pirate Jenny, because they're funny, but I feel like they're just going to be side characters.
I'm positive. So does anybody for a second believe that Red Scare is actually Russian?
No.
Yeah. Of course not. But I love it.
I assume he just puts the accent on with the mask.
Because, otherwise, people aren't going to notice the one Eastern European guy in Tulsa.
Are all the other masked, hero cops, so not like the grunts, the ones with the cool costumes, are they all white except for Sister Knight? Pirate Jenny, Panda, right. Although I don't get the sense he, maybe he goes out on missions.
Yeah, he doesn't seem very hero.
He's a desk sergeant.
Yeah, he's a mascot, more like, and that's.
I wish we could have Panda come back for an episode.
Yeah.
A panda-centric episode, even.
Yeah. I wouldn't even mind if they did him like Moloch, If he's only in it to die, but is still like a central deal.
He can get a before Panzer,
Yeah, before.
He can get 2 issues of it.
2 more things. Number 1, the centrifuge that Vite uses to grow the babies strikes me as more steampunk than anything in the currently ongoing adaptation of his Dark Materials. And 2, the amount of egg foreshadowing and the kind of recurring egg motif just strikes me that it's Series 7A of Doctor Who all over again, because that had the egg arc going on. So that's
it's actually going somewhere this time.